welcome. It's great to see you here in this afternoon. Like Daniela already mentioned, this is the first day of 3 very special days, I think, with very interesting people coming together who all have an amazing artistic or activist or curatorial practice. And I think it's really special in the sense because usually that doesn't happen necessarily, in the frame of these sort of residency programs, that people have the chance to actually come together again and exchange and connect. And I think with Udun's impulse right now, it was a beautiful metaphor for this idea of connecting and networks. And today, particularly in the context of water and the ocean, which is something that the group has discussed already this morning. I wasn't yet part of that, so I'm also really curious about what you're going to share now this afternoon. And so I'm very happy to have the 3 of you here today.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward. And what we're going to do is that I'm briefly going to read your biographies, because not necessarily everyone in the room knows who you are and what you do. And after that, we start with some questions, and you will share more about your practice. And I'm going to start with you, Patti, here in the middle. Patti is an architect and curator working across building, art education, and curatorial practices. Patti challenges dominant notions of place and belonging, foregrounding the intersections of identity, memory, race, and gender. Born at sea, aboard a ship en route to Sao Tome in Principe, Patti is committed to the colonial framework centering African island worlds as fugitive edges and radical margins. Her practice explores the entanglements of spatial narratives and power and the relationships between people, land, and the built and natural environment. She is committed to creating independent, multidisciplinary, and collaborative spaces for ideation, experimentation, documentation, dissemination, and research centered on Black African and diasporic practices. Patti founded also the collective XU Collective, Storia na Lugar, a platform for storytelling and counter-narrative practices, and here, otherwise an experimental platform for African and diasporan women creatives and spatial thinkers. She was also the founding director of SIDLOT, yeah, a multidisciplinary research center at the University of Cabo Verde, and visiting professor at Columbia University. And she was a resident in frame of the KfW Foundation in 2024, where the theme was the sustainable city. And you came together with Uine, who's going to join us today as your collaborator and your guest. And so I'm going to briefly also introduce you, Uine. So Uine is an activist, educator, fisherman, and leader of the Bananeiras communities in Ilha de Maré in Baía. He holds a degree in rural education with an emphasis on agricultural sciences from the Federal University of Recôncavo de Baía. He is part of the artisanal fishermen and fisherwoman movement, MPP, the MPP Youth Coordination and the MPP Water School Coordination, and works as a community educator at the Support Center for the Sons and Daughters of Fishermen and Shellfish Gatherers of Bananeiras. In 2024, he received a scholarship from the United Nations High Commissioner's Indigenous Fellowship Program, which focuses on mechanisms for the defense of human rights. So welcome, and thank you so much also for joining us today and bringing in your perspective. And then, finally, but last not but least, as they say, Sreymao. You are a visual artist based in Phnom Penh, in Cambodia. You were born in 1986 at a refugee camp on the Thai border. Your multidisciplinary practice includes painting, photography, digital drawing, sculpture, and performance. And your work explores personal expressions and memories, as well as the changing physical and psychological landscapes of Cambodian urban and rural communities. You graduated from Phra Phon Loi Selpak School of Visual and Applied Arts in Battambang Province in 2006, and has collaborated with various writers in visual storytelling and published several graphic novels. Sreymao was resident in Salvador de Bahia in 2025, where the theme was recognized limits. And so we will start maybe with the two of you, Patti and Uine, and maybe kind of connecting to what we just saw with Undine, starting with the, from the waters. You had a project in Salvador de Bahia, which was called Ingesting Waters, Breathing the Ocean, Liquid Alliances of Black Atlantic, Ecologies and Universities of Water. And I think I would like to just more generally enter by asking how water, as both as a material and as a metaphor, how this is a framework for your thinking around ecology and history and the Black Atlantic.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, my dear panelists, my special guest, Uine. Thank you, Yvette. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you. Yes, that was the title of what I proposed even before going to Baía. I'm an architect, trained as an architect, so you wouldn't think immediately of water as my medium. But in many ways, I think about the relationships of people, place, and power. And once you think about how knowledge is produced spatially, I like to say that I'm not so much an architect, but a spatial thinker and a spatial practitioner. So to unpack the relationships that happen across space, and this division between water and land is very much a colonial construct. So for me, this process has been, as also someone who was born at sea during colonial times and being from islands, it's also a way to construct worlds otherwise and find relationships between different places. So a more relational practice. So water has become a metaphor. It has become a political lens through which to understand space across different scales, across geographies. So when I had this fortunate invitation or acceptance to Villa Sul, for me it was very important to think with this lens of water and to enter Salvador da Bahia through its bay and through its islands. And that's how I became introduced to the islands of the Bay of All Saints, and through this kind of Black Atlantic relationship. So for me, it was important to connect to communities in the Bay of Todos Santos, and I was very much welcomed by the community of Bananeiras, where Uine is from, and that is why for me it's very important that he be here. So that was my proposition, to really connect and find alliances across water. And just to give a sense of Cabo Verde, we're an island nation, archipelago, that struggles with water. So even though we are surrounded by water, we have a lot of droughts, and we depend on desalinated water. So also to understand the distribution and access to water is also very important. So my work has been in how to understand the world through this lens. I'll stop here for now.
Maybe before coming to you, I would like to go a bit deeper into this, because I think it's key how you talk about the island versus the continents and the oceans. And I think the island tends to be a more kind of peripheral perspective and not necessarily seen as a center, and particularly as we're talking today also about knowledge structures. It would be great if you maybe could go a bit more into this, what your motivation maybe also is. I mean, you talked a bit about this, but you have also these terms, like you talk about radical margins or fugitive edges, that this is how you see the island. And I think there's this huge power and potential in the island. And maybe you can talk a bit more about that.
Thank you, Yvette. Yes, absolutely. I made those claims because I think that islands have been instrumentalized. They've been used in imperialist logics. Cabo Verde also was a nation or a space that was settled specifically for the exploitation of people, African people. So it was settled during the slave trade. And it has been constructed and narrated in particular ways that erase also a lot of other possibilities of understanding. And even now, we construct a narrative around being close to Africa, but also being other. And I question a lot of that exceptionality, and I try to kind of center islands as spaces of relationality. So how perhaps if we center these spaces that have been instrumentalized, but they also have resisted a particular way of seeing the world, but have been so central to the way the world operates. So to me, this centering island is also an important way to question the primacy of continental thinking, of being made peripheral, and claiming all these relationalities that we are so much entangled in. So I like to claim that space. I think that it's a position from which to think the world. I hope it could be instrumentalized in a more positive way, in a relational with other islands across oceans, and to also understand politically where we are in this particular moment. Yes.
And maybe now is a good moment also to come to you, Uine. Simply because, I mean, there's a reason why you're here today and why you collaborated, but maybe before you talk about that, maybe you could share your perspective from, living on an island, being very rooted in that community, being very aware of the ecological and historical knowledge that comes from that context, how you see that in a more maybe also practical perspective as a fisherman, as a water steward, and as a activist and community organizer, that maybe complements also what Patti has just shared.
Então, boa tarde. Primeiro que para mim a água é a fonte de vida, né? Eu não estaria aqui se não fosse as águas e as águas da Baía de Todos os Santos, águas que para a gente são águas sagradas que têm dado o alimento e que têm dado a vida do meu território. Então, meu avô tem uma música que eu não vou me arriscar a cantar, até porque eu sou péssimo cantando, mas eu vou recitar para vocês, que na música de meu avô ele localiza a Ilha de Maré, mas também fala porque a gente vive e sobrevive e resiste na Ilha de Maré, né? A música de meu avô fala mais ou menos assim: minha ilha só tem mato, mas é linda de se ver. Eu não troco a minha ilha, nem por mim nem por você. Minha ilha deu petróleo e deu azeite de dendê, e ainda tem marisco que dá para sobreviver. Minha ilha de Maré fica perto de São Tomé, faz fronteiras com Caboto e faz fronteiras com Passé. E nessa música meu avô fala por que a gente sobrevive na ilha, do que a gente sobrevive na ilha e por que também a gente não vai deixar a Ilha de Maré, né? A Ilha de Maré que é um território sagrado, que é banhado pelas águas da Baía de Todos os Santos, mas as águas que um dia já teve o nome de Quirimurê, dadas pelos nossos povos originários, que foram expulsos dos territórios nos quais a gente vem vivendo e resistindo há muitos anos. Então, a Ilha de Maré que ela fica próxima da primeira refinaria de petróleo do Brasil, que é a refinaria Landulfo Alves, mas que produz mais de 60% do pescado que alimenta a cidade de Salvador, que é a cidade mais preta fora do continente africano, e logo Ilha de Maré é o bairro mais negro do município de Salvador. Ilha de Maré compõe as 3 ilhas que pertencem ao município de Salvador, mas é uma das 23 ilhas e municípios que tem ao redor da Baía de Todos os Santos. Então, a minha comunidade ela sobrevive exclusivamente da água. A minha comunidade, se não fosse a água, não existiria. E sem a água, a gente não tem nem como se locomover, até porque o único acesso à minha comunidade é pelo mar. E é pelo mar que tem dias que está revolto, tem dias que está calmo, tem dias que quer ser acessada e que está produtivo, mas também tem dias que não quer ser acessada e que não quer dar produtividade. Então, sem a água, não teria Ilha de Maré, não teria Uine, não teria essa produtividade de alimento, um alimento tradicional que dialoga com a natureza, que é como a gente vem trabalhando. E com isso, a gente tem levado as ideias de que a água é fonte de vida, de educação, de resistência, tem levado para a sala de aula porque a gente compõe vários grupos e mecanismos de defesa do território. Eu faço parte de um podcast, que é o Podmar, que é o podcast informativo do meu território de Ilha de Maré, e é um podcast que tem levado as informações com a nossa oralidade, mas também para que seja fortalecida essa ideia de que a ilha só tem mato, mas é linda de se ver, e que eu não vou trocar minha ilha nem por mim, nem por vocês, nem por lugar nenhum e nem pessoas alguma que chegue e que queira a nossa ilha, que é o que tem acontecido no território de Ilha de Maré. Então, fazer essa correlação com o trabalho de Patti, para a gente tem uma significância muito grande, porque Patti vem de ilhas também. E vem de ilhas que têm um cotidiano um pouco diferente da nossa, mas que também tem suas singularidades, tem suas particularidades que vão relacionando as nossas vivências em Ilha de Maré. Então, receber Patti que vem lá da África, quando meu avô diz em uma outra música dele, que ele é africano de pele e de cor, que ele tem muito orgulho e tem muito amor, e o sonho de meu avô é ir para a África do Sul, para qualquer país africano que seja. Então, receber Patti também é fazer com que ele conecte Ilha de Maré, que é o bairro mais negro de Salvador, Salvador, que é o município mais negro fora da África do Sul, a essa vivência e essa ideia de que as águas elas têm suas distâncias, mas também têm suas conectividades e que uma hora ou outra a gente se esbarra com uma ou uma pessoa que vem dialogando com o que a gente tem vivenciado na Ilha de Maré. Então a gente usa a água como fonte de renda, de vida, mas também de educação. A maré, ela ensina por si só, mas também tem que ter as práticas dos nossos ancestrais, dos nossos mais velhos. Ninguém aprende a pescar por tabela, ninguém aprende a pescar por interesse particular somente, só acordar e vou para o mar e vou pegar o peixe. Se não souber onde o vento vai soprar, se não souber onde o peixe pode passar, se não souber onde a água corre mais, onde ela corre menos, onde ela pode ser acessada, onde ela não pode, você vai voltar com sua sacola, com seu cofo, com sua rede vazia, não vai pegar o peixe que vai alimentar sua família e também não vai ter essa relação direta com a natureza, com as águas sagradas e as águas que a gente tem que tentar proteger, porque o desenvolvimento ele não tem envolvido as ideias ecológicas e de sobrevivência dessas águas. Então, eu venho desse lugar, de um lugar onde a água é vida, onde a água é saúde, onde a água é resistência, mas também é educação, várias formas de ensinamento.
Thank you. Uine, maybe you could share a little bit more about how you protect the island and the water, and what sustainability, which is a word that comes up a lot, what it actually really means to you in, like, you know, everyday life of the community.
Certo. Em Ilha de Maré, a gente tem feito a pesca artesanal, práticas agroecológicas, práticas que dialogam com a natureza. Então, a gente sempre respeita o período de reprodução das espécies, respeita o período de reprodução das marés. Então, a gente tenta dialogar com o que a natureza tenta nos dizer. A gente aprendeu e aprende com o tempo e com os mais velhos a ouvir a natureza, a ouvir as águas, a ouvir o que ela tem para dizer, mas também ouvir de forma sensível, entendendo que não é só uma fonte de renda ou de alimento. Se a gente não preservar, se a gente não cuidar, não vai ter o pescado futuramente, que é o que é interessante para a gente, né? Voltar da pescaria com fartura, voltar da pescaria com o produto que a natureza nos deu. Então a gente tem protegido a natureza quando a gente tem respeitado essa reprodução, tem respeitado os ciclos naturais. Então a gente tem dito, inclusive, que as interferências climáticas, e aí puxando para essa discussão das mudanças climáticas, mas a gente tem dito que a interferência climática ela pesa muito mais nos territórios onde sobrevive da natureza, onde dialoga direto com a natureza, do que em territórios nos quais não depende tanto desse diálogo direto com a natureza. Então, um território onde tem uma contaminação muito grande, ele tende a sofrer muito mais com as mudanças climáticas do que os outros territórios. Então, a gente tenta dar essa visibilidade para a Ilha de Maré. Ilha de Maré é um território autossustentável, onde a gente produz o nosso alimento, nossa fonte de renda, em diálogo com a natureza, mas logo enquanto esse território estiver sendo contaminado por metais pesados principalmente, se tornará um território que não terá sua produtividade e que sempre precisará de alguém que pare para defendê-lo. Então a gente tem feito discussões nas universidades, nos espaços de formações, principalmente dentro dos territórios, para para dizer que o lugar onde tem a primeira refinaria de petróleo do Brasil precisa olhar para a natureza e entender que a contaminação por metais pesados ela ameaça povos e ameaça meio e modo de vida. Então, Ilha de Maré sobrevive das águas, mas sobrevive em diálogo direto com a natureza. As águas elas precisam de momento de descanso, precisa de momento de reprodução. O manguezal que conecta aí a nossa floresta verde, que é a nossa fonte de vida, que o manguezal é fonte de vida, onde as espécies se reproduzem, para a gente tem seu período de ser acessado ou não, e a gente tem defendido dessa forma, tanto com a nossa oralidade, mas também com os ensinamentos que os mais velhos têm deixado, que é essa proteção em período que pode, que não pode, mas também ampliando essa discussão para quem tem lucrado com o outro lado dessa natureza. Então, quem também produz nas águas da Baía de Todos os Santos precisa se responsabilizar pelos danos causados, seja eles qual for. E a gente tem responsabilizado o nosso povo também pelas ações que não deveriam ter sido feitas, mas principalmente as grandes empresas que têm contaminado as águas que produzem alimento e vida para uma população muito grande.
Yes. Thank you. Maybe one final question for both of you before we connect this to Sremao's practice is if you could talk a bit more about this collaboration and this encounter that came about when you were in Bahia.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, my desire to connect across these waters, the Atlantic, historically, politically, poetically, but also kind of as an embodied experience to be welcomed by the community of Bananeiras. It was really a process of experimentation. And the reason why it was so important to advocate for Uine to be here is to speak about this relationship of receiving me in Baía de Todos os Santos, in Ilha de Maré, in Bananeiras, but also how we can think of these moments of knowledge production and knowledge exchange in ways that are more reciprocal, in ways that address expectations, both for institutional expectations, but also in the terms of knowledge production. So for me, it was also, it was my first artist residency, actually, as I mentioned to Lionel and Federica. But it was one that I was very aware of extractivist processes, of also not exoticizing certain conditions, and how we can have a creative and processes of knowledge production in ways that are more reciprocal. So at the end, it became not a product, but a sharing of a process. So we shared a meal. We exchanged recipes. We shared moments together. And that was how my welcoming into that community occurred. So it was very much at the level of intimacy, a level of personal connection, a level of exchanging stories, and of an embodied experience. So it wasn't an output that produced any artwork, but it was one that is acknowledged that I was also receiving knowledge. As an architect, as a spatial thinker, it was not through my lens of interpreting that particular place, but it was also to understand what this geography meant to them, what this manguezal as an ancestral land means, and to break a lot of the kind of language and vocabulary that is used to understand these spaces. So for me, it was a series of activations and a series of experiences that were shared, but always with this idea of how can it become a reciprocal project? How do we understand this? I don't know about Uine, how he perceived this.
Assim, tem uma questão que foi colocada em uma dessas vivências com o Patti, que até hoje martela na minha cabeça, que era sobre os possíveis sonhos que a gente tinha no território de Ilha de Maré e para o território de Ilha de Maré. E na oportunidade que eu tive de responder essa pergunta, me causava uma angústia muito grande, assim, de tentar refletir o que a gente sonha para a Ilha de Maré, o que a gente sonha para o nosso povo no nosso território. Então, eu vim de um lugar onde os ensinamentos ele acontece primeiro no chão da nossa terra, no chão do quintal da nossa casa, dos nossos mais velhos, que são os nossos ancestrais, que são os nossos anciões dos territórios que sobreviveram ali há muito tempo, que sobrevivem das práticas tradicionais do nosso território. Então, da mesma forma que eu aprendi, é o que eu tento ensinar para os meus mais novos, e a gente sabe que os ensinamentos de comunidades tradicionais, eles precisam ser passados de geração em geração, porque a gente aprende ouvindo, aprende e ensina dessa forma também. Então, Patti perguntava qual era esse sonho que a gente tinha para o território, para o futuro, e está cada vez mais difícil pensar em sonhos, em possíveis sonhos futuros. Assim. É um território onde a gente deveria viver em maior harmonia e com maior sustentabilidade, com maior produtividade, em um território onde as práticas deveriam ser bem tradicionais. Ouvir as experiências que Patti trazia do seu território de Cabo Verde ali, as práticas que ela produz e que ela vem vivenciando no território dela, às vezes se conectava, mas às vezes também tinha uma relação muito distante para o território de Ilha de Maré, e que isso fazia com que a gente ficasse cada vez mais curiosos e entender como é que a gente poderia direcionar a discussão entre Patti, que vem do continente africano, e o Uine, seu Djalma, a Marisélia, a Regina, que vem de Ilha de Maré, que vem das águas da Baía de Todos os Santos. Então, ouvir Patti também ensinava muito para a gente, ensina até hoje. Então, as práticas que a gente reproduzia no território era muito dessa oralidade, de um momento em que a gente já viveu em sonhos, já viveu pelos ancestrais, já viveu nas histórias contadas, já viveu na alimentação, a gente no alimento que a gente produz, que tem muita singularidade com o que é produzido no continente africano também, muita coisa que é trazido do continente africano. Eu sou de religião de matriz africana, eu sou Ogã do Ile Axé Odeta Laque, de um terreiro de candomblé, que as práticas em Yorubá e as práticas do meu território dialogam com as práticas que é vivenciada no continente africano. Eu venho de uma comunidade quilombola que descende dessa diáspora africana, que descende do que foi tirado do nosso povo enquanto cultura, enquanto vivência. A gente entende que os nossos familiares mais velhos estão no continente africano. Então, fazer esse trabalho com uma pessoa que vem das águas de onde a gente pertence, porque nós fomos trazidos para o Brasil à força. Nós fomos colocados em um território que é dos povos originários, que não é nosso em primeira, assim, em primeira mão, em estar em um território onde não era habitável. A gente foi trazido e eu moro de frente para um engenho de cana-de-açúcar, onde o meu povo foi escravizado, que hoje dá nome a um museu, que hoje a gente olha e conta a história, mas uma história que já foi vivida pelos nossos antepassados. Então, fazer essa conexão com o trabalho que Patti desenvolvia era ouvir dela os sonhos que a gente tem para o nosso futuro, para o nosso presente, que vem do passado. É também entender que a nossa vida pode ser vivida em outros lugares, mas que a gente tem tentado reproduzir de forma saudável em Ilha de Maré.
Thank you to both of you. And I would like to lead over to you, Sreymao, because in a way, even though maybe there was not this collaboration, it's something that you also try to do to kind of bridge and understand where, possible connections are, differences between the land and the sea and the salt in Cambodia and in Bahia in Brazil. And you actually also came with a project that is also entitled Breath. So breathing the ocean is something that was important to you, Patti, and also to you. And maybe we could start there, because this is not really clear, of course. How do you breathe? How do you breathe the land? How do you breathe the water? And that tension between that. So maybe you could start by talking a little bit about that.
Thank you for having me today, and thank you, and thank you for make this happening. It's amazing, and yes, at the start of the project, it's a kind of trimming, and it's because when I was in Cambodia, I never know how the Salvador look like, and I've been doing the project that talking about Cambodian college, no Cambodian, what is called, like the base along and then has something that already has a whole project video performance, and then the nomination come and it's very interesting and make me trimming to another side, want to learn what how different ocean look like, in how the people in another ocean are feeling, and want to experience something, and put a lot of imagination to see, and quite scary. And in the whole this project, when I experience in Salvador, I feel like the ocean talking to me. It's like amazing and supportive from all the team at Baía, Gute Baía, like Villa Sol. It was amazing experience. I cannot express enough how the team supportive to make this project working together so well. Yep, I hope this give back well to your question.
I don't know whether anyone had the chance already, because your work is also here, the film, so you can watch it afterwards. But maybe you want to now take the chance to contextualize a little bit that work.
Before I start into my project, I want to introduce why it's water to become a part of important series to be ocean. I am from the refugee camp, and then moving into Cambodian, a new land with 6 years old, and then with a lot of surrounded by the small stream in the village. So I grown up enjoy with the water, and then time to time I see the river become like unbreathed. You mean like you used to see a lot of boat crossing in front of your house become quiet, become crossing by the dam, and I never saw that I'm gonna focus a lot in the river, but because of curiosity about how each problem happen along the small stream come to the big lake of Cambodia as Tonle Sap and Mekong, I was like, what's it called, like has a big heart to to know the story behind just stopping by the dam. And then the last project was curious about the ocean, because people not just crab over the small stream, the big lake, the lake of the city that release the water in the city, but like many kilo into the ocean and crab over the land and kick out the original people, displacement. So yes, in when I was in Brazil, it's the same question coming like, do this breeding have the same breed as Cambodia? Do the water everywhere we has try to stop the water as the way happened in Cambodia? I know like the people always talking about how they try to make the water move in the country, like the vein or the artery of the heart of the country. But for me, I see like the way they try to move the water, it try to stop breathing from time to time. Yeah, so very interestingly, when I was in Brazil, I mean in Salvador, I see similarity. So I think that's why my project was quite pushed me to make it happen, that the breed through the sea and the breed in Cambodia happen. Yes, happen in El Salvador, and I think it's perfectly for me in my imagination, and has a lot of question with the ocean between me and the ocean, and the people live the ocean in Salvador. That's why the second video happened. And I think I brought different, because I am not original from Salvador and or from a Brazilian, so I'm kind of like I don't know how much the pan that the people live on the island connect to the ocean. So I was happily invited the colleague that was working with me during I was residency in Salvador to be a part of performance. And I am, yes, there's a lot of conversation between each area that we go through, perform and personal sharing. And yes, I hope you go and check the video and have a question and ask me. Thank you so much.
I do have another question to ask for you, which is, I mean, you described it very beautifully, how you saw these connections.
Thank you.
Despite very different geographical contexts. And in your wider artistic practice, it is a lot about the storage of memories and personal memories and identities in the land. And maybe you could share a bit more about that. Maybe also more generally in your practice, if you don't feel like it connects too much to the project. But I think it's very important because it's something that Patti and Uine also in a way shared, that the ocean and the land, there are these living archives of our memories. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that, these kind of explorations that you have been conducting for a while now also.
As I mentioned at the start, that I am from, of course, my parents quite from Cambodia, and then they run to meet each other in a refugee camp and produce me. So yeah, when you're in Cambodia, you quite a lot of asking yourself questions like why you need to immigration and then return back from this land. And because my dad is born from another side of the country and my mom born in another side of the country, and we put together we're in front of the river that I live nowadays. It quite give me a lot of question. This is real happening, and this is put me and the spot connecting the water, and was a lot of things that I keep going back to the memory of return. Why don't I just stay at the refugee camp forever? And this is something that pulled me, and actually. I always like to move to somewhere that looking for the idea of refugee, and then create the work, create the moment. I don't know why I'm so cling to the story of it's like immigration movement, and so the same time talking about displacement, personal. I always like try to explore and learning how it has suffering. And sometimes I am the person is a victim of the suffering. Like lately, I was in Salvador. I was so spoiled. I was so good. And then when come back to Cambodia, we has a conflict between Cambodia and Thailand. And part of my province was covered by the fire. And then I has a collective in Phnom Penh, and we do immediately movement to emotional support to the people at the refugee side. But then when I spent 4 days there and to do a workshop to support the kid, and then when I come back, I am the one that really broke down because reminding all like when I was in the childhood, and then sorry, a little bit go to personal. And then become like I return home and then try to focus and heal myself and building the studio. And when it was so crazy when I back from Brazil, my home really broke down too. It's like it's just rotten, like the whole house, my personal house. And then return from the war side, I'm really broke down and I shut off with everything. And when a good day approached me to do something for the personal, talking about the good day, I has no concentrate to write about it. But when I was in Good Day, I also in Baía, I also know the story about the war. I didn't feel attachment to the problem until I was at the refugee camp, and it's become a part of another art practice that I come back to my home and fixing the home, and it become another like, like, so for me, for talking about the practice, it's always about like working one step and meet and feeling and working something that you feel connecting to the skin, and then you talk about it immediately and then release and curing your personal feeling. That's why I'm here talking about my practice, connect to my studio, like something that are processing healing. The same time you use this thing and comparing and talking about the story. It kind of is a therapy practical, use art to heal yourself and also talking about what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question that is kind of goes maybe to all of you, because in a way we talk a lot about space in the end of the day, and you all have a spatial practice coming from very different perspectives, though, from a more artistic perspective, from an architecture perspective, from a more activist perspective, and it would be interesting to learn more about your thinking around with, what, let's call it maybe a decolonized spatial practice is for you, in the sense of how you define it, or maybe what it means, what you refuse also. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you actively do, but it can be also what you choose not to do or adhere to. Maybe to round that up a little bit, coming from this more personal also experiences that you shared, what you maybe also learned for yourself from that in a more general sense, thinking around a practice that has for all of you this personal aspect, but also very much a political component to it that is relevant when you're sitting here today, for example, and sharing it.
Can I start first?
You want to start? Or
Yeah, of course.
I hope I gonna got to the point of your question. I was interested in. I'm not really understand. When I try to understand colonial, the deeper, the more or less I don't understand about it. Because from time to time we make a lot of things, and I don't know why I couldn't catch it. What happening? It's like a simple thing. When I was in Cambodia, I really again of because in Cambodia there's a big movement that they destroy the colonial building and the architecture stuff, and I'm quite really against it. And then when I was like, I really want the government in Cambodia to do something to protect those buildings. But when my experience in Baía, I know it's beautiful, it's stuff, but at the same time I also, I really like those things, but at the same time, I had so many questions comparing between protected and thing, and then become like, do we are, now in my generation, do we are completely mixing all those and affecting on nowadays thinking. So yes, I'm really has a lot of questions, and I hope to learn from the next answer. That's why I want to to talk first. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to answer it. I think that we grab onto these processes, and I think I'm very much for decolonial practices, even though sometimes we don't understand what all of that entails. I think it has to be a series of attempts to undo or to learn anew or to repair, but also to imagine otherwise. So it's coming from a discipline, not a practice, but a discipline that is so colonial, so elitist, whose canon is so Western-based. So, even the language that we use in architecture, inside, outside, the way that space is understood and spoken about and mapped, and what is erased. I mean, all of this has to be considered as a discipline. Of course, architecture has been made for millennia since humans were in this world, but as a discipline, the way it was conceptualized, deployed, and its legacy with imperialist, with colonial practices is real, it's experienced, and it continues. So for me, when I claim a decolonial practice, I acknowledge that I'm aware of this, even though I may not be able to undo, or it's not only about necessarily destroying, but it's a way of acknowledging and trying to find a different vocabulary. And I also work in teaching or pedagogy and thinking, what does it mean to teach architecture? But if you think in some African languages, we don't have the word for public, private, in, out. There's other ways of understanding the world. There are other worldviews. So language and the language of architecture creates worldviews. And we have accepted many ways of understanding space in a language that has been imposed. So for me, it's a process of understanding other spatial practices and the way that, for example, in Bananeiras, you understand tide, and you understand the mangroves, and you understand what those spaces mean, how they create realities and create lived experiences that are different way of understanding. That is not about possession and dispossession. It's not about land belonging or not belonging, about land being divided, about borders, so I think that it's an ongoing process, but I do claim that term or that methodology just to make sure that I recognize that it's about power relationships. So for me, it's an ongoing practice. I experiment this way, I experiment that way, I teach this way, I question, but it's ultimately also about finding other vocabulary to understand and to acknowledge other relationships to space from communities that have a relationship and that see the world differently. That is not only about possession, belonging, property. So for me, as a spatial thinker architect, it is very much about rethinking the very language that we use, amongst other things.
Então, assim, eu vejo o Brasil, por exemplo, segue numa lógica muito contrária a descolonializar algo, né? O Brasil, muito pelo contrário, assim, nós que viemos de comunidades tradicionais, a gente enxerga o território, a terra, como bem comum, como um bem coletivo e que nada pode ser feito se não for através da coletividade. Mas as práticas brasileiras vêm muito contrário a isso. Cada vez mais o Estado brasileiro querendo dizer a quem pertence cada povo, cada espaço, cada pedaço de terra e seus lugares nas águas, assim por diante. Então a gente vê que ainda é um caminho muito reverso do que a gente espera para um território de bem comum, assim. Em Ilha de Maré não é diferente. É um território que tem as práticas que são direcionadas, são práticas que fogem da coletividade, são práticas que meu avô até costuma falar que o desenvolvimento ele não envolve, enquanto o desenvolvimento ele não envolver as pessoas que protegem aquele ambiente, aquele espaço, ele não vai fugir dessa lógica de acumular riquezas e que a riqueza ela fica na mão de poucas pessoas. Tanto que Salvador tem dito isso, né? Salvador, que é o território mais preto fora do continente africano, e a gente reforça muito isso porque isso faz muito parte da nossa identidade, é um território onde a riqueza está concentrada na mão da minoria de seus 5% e não dos seus 95%. Então, foge muito da lógica de tentar mudar algo que está sendo colocado aí desde que o Brasil é Brasil. Então, eu acho que tentando responder a sua pergunta, é isso, assim, enquanto não nos ouvir, enquanto não ouvir as pessoas que vêm da cidade baixa, da cidade que pensa Salvador enquanto periferia, enquanto espaço de coletividade, enquanto território sagrado, não vai mudar muito a lógica do acúmulo e do poder na mão de poucos e dos deveres na mão de muitos.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? So maybe to round this up, I mean, this was already like a big question, but I have another big question, which is connected to kind of this, coming back to the title of the panel, which is around knowledge structures and systems. And we kind of touched on this notion of the ocean being the living archive. And I would like to go a bit more into this idea of archive and as a knowledge structure, because I think an archive can have various forms. Obviously, our bodies are archives as much as the ocean and the land. And maybe you all, it's also a question to all of you, could share what your idea of an archive is. It doesn't even have to exist yet. It can be also something that you're dreaming of building or of finding, of restoring, to make sure, and it kind of ties into what Uine had said also before, you know, that certain memories and knowledge systems also are being kept alive, and that they, you know, transpire to the next life and generations, but also maybe to, you know, bring in alternatives to what often, especially in a, let's say, European, US American context, is understood as an archive, which is often something very static, that maybe needs to be hijacked or questioned, but not necessarily has its own agency in that sense. And I feel like with all your practices, there is a lot of archiving from, you know, different approaches and ways how we can understand the archive or the, you know, building knowledge structures that are sustainable and that, yeah, that stay on.
Wow, Yvette. Well, thank you for the provocation. I think that I have thought about the archives, and I think about them in reference to the canons, you know, that how we build knowledge on top of something, right? The foundations for knowledge building, or the foundations to sustain us. But now that you've put the question, I'm looking for an answer. And today in our meeting this morning, a lot of people reference their grandparents. Uine references grandparents. We reference our ancestors. We reference our lived embodied experience, and also Lisa spoke about her embodied practice. So I think that we are all tapping into building what this archive can be, what sustains us in this world, what sustains our black and brown bodies in this kind of hostile spaces. So I don't know if an archive is a closed kind of definition, but I think it is about us tapping into our embodied experience, our lived experience, our autobiographies, our recipes, you know, exchanging these recipes and exchanging these songs. And I think that for me, those are the kind of living archives of how we could even imagine a different future. So there's no one definition for them. I think it's a series of practices. Maybe it's a processes, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's where I can go today, I think.
With me, right? Yes, I never think about it, but thank you for pick up the question and make me think. When the early age, I really don't trust to be in an art journey, and I quite feel has a lot of question personally that to be an artist maybe not provide anything important into the community. So then I changed my practice to be, because that time I was quite close with the community, and that I experienced that the community really lack of document and education, whatever platform. So then that time I was thinking like, why don't I support the people to create up, build up with the book? And then when you start to think about that, you think about create the best book. But then after the processing, I learned that it's not important to create the best book, because every time that you're thinking to create the best, it's never the best, because you try to put something, and the first time never the best. So then I has another idea to talking to the friend and become like a movement, like everyone become a part of writing a book, do anything, make any platform that you are less legacy, that you believe is important to community. And then this start with emptiness, and then everyone become like a writer, a drawer, illustrator. And then I look back after 20 years, look back now, everyone become a good writer in the community, a good filmmaker. So I learned that sometimes that archive that you want in community is not just try to spreading like how community lack of look like. And that's how I think it's that I really like community when you has a group of people, you has a group of right people, and you share what you're looking for the future. Yeah. And this everyone become archive and sharing, and the community becomes super strong. Yes, that's something that I look back now and kind of smile.
Então, a gente tem feito os nossos arquivos a partir da oralidade, a partir das contações de história, e nós, enquanto Juventude do Território de Ilha de Maré, produzimos recentemente um documentário que é Maré de Memórias, que a gente entende que os nossos arquivos eles precisam ser contados e contados pelas vozes que ainda estão em vidas para que seja reproduzida aí por muito mais tempo. Então, breve, ainda não é algo que está público, a gente acabou de fazer o lançamento na comunidade, mas breve estará público, que é uma maré de memórias afetivas, de memórias de resistência. Então a gente parte do nosso arquivo a partir dessa oralidade, das memórias dos nossos mais velhos, mas também produzindo com a nossa oralidade para que o nosso povo escute e se entenda. Então a gente parte de um arquivo que tente trazer na prática o que a gente tem trabalhado dentro dos territórios. E a gente trabalha com educação, com conscientização, com fortalecimento das lutas, educação, porque a gente entende que educação é poder, é a única coisa que ninguém vai tirar de você, você adquire para você e não para você, mas que também precisa ser reproduzida, porque não adianta você acumular e não repassar para os próximos. Mas a gente tem feito essa maré de memória, tem feito esse museu de memória viva, entendendo o arquivo enquanto algo que precisa ser contado, mas contado pela nossa boca, da nossa forma.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think this is a beautiful kind of closing remark, and I thank all three of you for your really amazing and very inspiring input.